Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar from SPEC Innovations, an overview of the DoDAF using Innoslate. My name is Elizabeth Steiner, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. First, I would like to go over some housekeeping before we get started. During the presentation, feel free to send us questions, and we will get them answered in the question and answer part of the webinar. You can also interact with us on LinkedIn through the Innoslate user group or through Twitter using the handle @Innoslate. The webinar is being recorded and we will make it available to you after the live presentation, so be sure to keep an eye out for it in your inbox. Now I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Steve Dam. He'll be sharing with you how to leverage the power of the DoDAF through Innoslate. Dr. Dam is the president and founder of SPEC Innovations, as well as one of our DoDAF training instructors. He has been involved with research experiments, operations analysis, software development, systems engineering, and training for more than 40 years. Dr. Dam participated in the development of C4ISR Architecture Framework and DoD Architecture Framework. He has also received an Expert Systems Engineering Professional Certification from INCOSE. He currently is applying systems engineering techniques to various DoD, DOE, and commercial projects. Feel free to send Dr. Dam any questions through the LinkedIn user group or send him an email. And now I will hand over the controls to Dr. Dam and we will get started.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about what the DoDAF is and give you some introduction to architecture if you're not familiar with it. Then talk a little bit about what the DoDAF models are and get into a little bit of the details of that. Talk about what DoDAF is missing. And you'll find that that's an important part of how to develop an architecture. And then we're going to talk about what makes a good methodology, and then get into a live demonstration using Innoslate as the tool of choice for doing DoDAF. And then we'll have time for questions and answers. So what is DoDAF anyway? What is an architecture? And the definition of an architecture from DoD is this: the structure of components, their relationships, and the principles and guidelines governing their design and evolution over time. This is also in Joint Pub 1 and a variety of other places, but you'll see this definition for architecture. What this implies is that there has to be some kind of way to organize the information and capture it and display it. And what DoDAF did was, back in version 1.5, have 3 different views. The 3 different views replicate the different parts of DoD. The operational view, it relates to the commanders in the field, the COCOMs, the combatant commanders. The systems to the services and agencies do the technical standards views. So very often those 3 are different ways to look at an architecture and get you understand it. By the way, there's actually a 4th view missing in this, and DoDAF actually had the all views in it as well. So there's actually 4. So what's the elements of an architecture? You need an operational context in which to operate. You need the missions to accomplish. You need to capture the requirements and then decompose and maintain them and evolve them to accomplish the mission. You need the relationship among the requirements. You need organizations and roles to operate in the context and accomplish the mission. You need the relationship among organizations, and again, you'll see this word relationship keep popping up between each of these elements. Behavior and functions necessary to accomplish mission and tasks, again, and the relationship between those. Data and information from analyses, constraints on the design and execution, because nothing is unconstrained in the world. We all have the cost schedule constraints that will come into provide performance constraints. And then, of course, architecture is the highest level of design. And ultimately what we're trying to do with architecture is make decisions. We want to make a decision on what to go build and buy, or how to bring pieces of systems together to interoperate better. So those are some of the things about architecture. So as you can see, these elements we need to capture as a set of information that needs to be captured and then displayed in various ways. So the DoDAF gives you a mechanism for displaying them consistently. So what a lot of people see it just as this collection of pictures or documents put together into a loosely coupled set of information. But that's not really the idea of the DoDAF. The DoDAF was to bring these disparate pieces of information together, and they have to then overlap each other, these different products, to give you these different views. So what we really look at today is what we want is an architecture repository, something that can capture all the information that you need and then display the different information out into pictorial form in one way or another. And that way you can interrogate this architecture, all the different dimensions, all those different pieces of information form to give you that big picture. So one of the things that does confuse people all the time is that, well, what does it look like? With the new DoDAF 2.0, they got rid of the templates. And they did that because it was causing people the idea that they thought that it had to be a particular form. What was important is the information, capturing the information or the data so that you can then replicate it and display it in many different ways. And that was the idea of this picture here, was to let you realize that you can display that information in many different forms. So what's the DoDAF 2.0 structure today? Well, they took a more top-down approach, with making it more consistent with the JCIDs, the Joint Capabilities approach to developing systems. So it's more of a top-down. So the capability viewpoint is the top. The operational viewpoint, remember we saw earlier, was the operator's view. That comes down from that. And of course services were added or separated out from systems in 1.5, so they would be a separate viewpoints. And again, this is meant to be a hierarchy coming down. Now, of course, at every point in this hierarchy, there's the other views that go in parallel. On the far left, we have all view, which is the all view products, and we'll see what those do. Those cut across all these different other areas. The data and information viewpoint, that in fact is the data model, and data models occur again at each of the levels and should be consistent with those. Standards view, again, cuts across them all and touches them all. And then, of course, the project viewpoint, how you tie the project together and execute an actual architecture project. Or an actual program project, again, captures both those kinds of information. Now, one of the things that confuses people is the terminology. They added the words model and views and viewpoints in 2.0, and I know that caused everybody a lot of trouble. So one of the things we did was visualize those as in this way. So if you look at the far left, that column shows models, and those are the different models that are in the DoDAF. Those are things like the OV1, the OV2, SV4. All those things are called models now. Once you populate the models with data, those become views, or in my parlance, I call those the products. Those are the things that come out as a result of the actual analysis and bringing them together in that form. When you bring those viewpoints together, those views together, you create a viewpoint, and that's all the set of models plus data giving you your views for each of the different viewpoint areas. Now, when you bring all of those together, you get an architecture, and that's the DoDAF philosophy and approach. We find that that's okay, but again, we're just getting pieces of this in these two-dimensional slices and trying to bring them together. What we really have is a much bigger model, and really require probably thousands of views to actually completely describe the database that we're actually creating. So, but these are the 52 they used for comparison. That's the purpose of these models, remember, is to compare architectures. That's why the DoDAF was invented in the beginning. It wasn't meant to be a methodology. So let's talk about them very briefly. So just so you know, here's the AV products. There's the two AV products. The first one's the kind of project plan for the architecture. The second one says it's an integrated dictionary, but if you look at it very carefully, it says architecture data repository. So what they want is not only the definitions, so it's not just a list of a glossary, it's actually has all the relationships and things like that, the ontology or the information set and how you're bringing that information together into that as well. So you have to capture that whole database. If you're using a database tool, you deliver actually the database. Anyway, so and I'll talk about that when we get into Innoslate, what the form of that is today. Now, next set is the capability views, and these are new. So we'll look at them very briefly. The vision is very similar to what you may remember being the OV1 picture, but it's a more abstract picture. It's the vision of what they're trying to accomplish at a very high level. often a boxes and lines kind of diagram, very simple. The capability taxonomy is a hierarchy of the capabilities. That's how they're broken down from each other and build to create the maybe bigger capability you're looking for. And then this capability phasing, how do we bring the capabilities online in time as time goes on. Notice that's more of a timeline kind of chart with that one. The dependencies then also show the dependencies between the capabilities, how they're dependent upon one another to actually implement. Then we get into a series of mappings, and you notice at first you're not going to probably populate those mappings because they're to things you haven't built yet. The organizational, the operational activities, and the services. Those will all happen later if you're doing a top-down capabilities view first. So recognize you circle back on many of these products and improve them over time. So this is going to be an iterative process, anything you develop here. So let's jump to the next one, viewpoint, which is the data and information viewpoint. That's the standard data model approach, conceptual data model, a logical data model, a physical data model. Before, they had the DIV2 and the DIV3 were separate. They were actually in the OV, was the logical data model, that was an OV7, and before the physical data model was in the SV11. They didn't have a conceptual data model, which was always thought to be a kind of a hole. So this actually fixed that problem when they added this in. So again, now you're familiar, probably most of you or many of you are familiar with the operational viewpoints. The OV1 is the pretty picture. We all like the cartoon, we like the view graph, and it's actually one of the things that does communicate well to everybody. You also then have kind of a boxes and lines kind of resource flow to show how the things are connected together between operational resource and the need lines, or the need for information to flow between things. That can often be your operational organizations that are part of that in that flow. The OV3 is very interesting. It's a matrix, but it requires information, not only details about the actual resources themselves, the flows themselves and the need lines. It actually has information that's contained overlapping in the OV2 and the OV5. So again, you can start seeing already that these are products I have to develop together, not independently. The OV4 is a standard organization chart showing the organizational relationships. The OV5, A and B, they split out A and B for some reason this time, so the A is a decomposition tree, it's the hierarchy, and the B is the data flow diagram showing the inputs and outputs with the activities, operational activities. It's funny because those were always required, and they hadn't split them out before until version 2.0. The next thing you'll see is something very interesting. It's the ABCs, the OV6 ABC. And notice these are three different types of ways to show timing and sequencing of activities. And so you can use all three of them, or just use one of them. I tend to focus on the OV6C. That's a very typical. You can do a block flow diagram, things like that with that one. That works very well. So anyway, those remember the ABCs because we're going to see this a few more times. Project viewpoints. Okay, so now we have the project viewpoints, classic things about portfolio relationships, project timelines. So again, that map, and then a project capability mapping. So here's now go back to my capabilities, and I have to map my projects. So next is the services viewpoint, and again we see interface description, resource flow description, the same words we saw in the OV2. So that's a very similar diagram. Actually, the interface description diagram is also very similar. Those two diagrams can be very similar in nature. The next thing is some matrices that were added to show some mapping between the services and the systems. Before, we used to have that as one group, services and systems, so they added these matrices in 2.0. In number 4 there, the services view 4, is the functionality description. That's the equivalent to the OV5B model. And of course, you still want a hierarchy of those as well. So in fact, it's both the A and the B together, and they didn't split it out here for some reason. So that's kind of interesting. But so that has that same equivalence oversight. So in other words, if you do a functionality model, a data flow model using for the OV5, you can use the same thing here for the services view 4. Then Services View 5 is just another one of these mapping matrices between the operational activities and the services. And you notice how many mapping matrices we have in here. This is all if you're connected together in your relationships in your model, you'll find that those come out very easily. Actually, a natural output of doing the allocation you do. The number 6 is the services resource flow matrix. This is now very similar to the OV3. So you take a look at the same kind of things, and again, remember that overlap in the OV3 is also here in the Services View 6. That's actually then overlapping between the Services View 1 and 2 and also the Services View 4. So make sure you keep those together as you're developing them. The services measures matrix, that's now the metrics that you're going to use for services. So things like your service level agreement metrics you'll have in there will be part of that. Number 8 shows you the evolution in time, again, of the services, so the timeline diagram. And then, of course, the technology forecast showing how the new technologies will come in to play and help support those services. You can imagine bringing those two diagrams together and giving you some idea of where you're going for your transition planning. Now here, notice that the Services View 10 ABC shows up again with the rules model, a state transition, and event trace. Sure enough, they're the same kind of models that we just saw in the OVs, but this is a lower level of decomposition for the services. So that's the way to look at those. You can again use the same techniques you use on the OV 6 ABC here with the 10s. Now notice that the next thing, the systems viewpoints, are identical to the services viewpoints. They're just, again, at a lower level of decomposition, maybe a little differences in the matrix, but fundamentally they're the same set of information, but just at a lower level, and then with the mappings back to the other higher level items. Again, notice this the systems view 10 ABC, same thing. Finally, last but definitely not least, it's the standards profile and the standards forecast. Those used to be called the TVs. You may still see that in some of the documentation that's out there. Those used to be called the technical views or technical standards views. They've made it STDVs instead. But those are identical to the previous version. So now that we understand these set of things and understand there's overlap and there's a whole bunch of, how do I actually go building something like this? And the myth is that the framework provides a methodology for developing architectures. What it does is give us a structure for presenting architecture information so that now I can compare it easily between different architectures, which was the whole purpose of the DoDAF in the first place, as I mentioned. So remember this, that now I need to do something. I need to actually create a full methodology. And some people will argue a little bit on this point because they said, well, there's a process and there's the ontology, so now you have some of the basic elements of methodology. I think you're missing something. And what are you missing? The detailed methodology to actually implement this. You need the techniques, the processes, and the tools you're going to use to actually develop the architecture itself. So it's a lot. So there's still more you need to do. But if you do it right, this actually makes it simpler, and I'll show you why. Okay, so a good methodology, first of all, choose the technique you want to first to get the theory right. Then identify the tool that supports that technique, or tools that you maybe need a tool set to do everything you want to do to support that technique. And then obtain and develop your process. Okay, obtain, because very often most companies actually have detailed processes for doing things like this. So often you can just gather those and use them and tailor them to maybe a new technique or a new set of tools that you're using. First of all, then optimize all three. Make sure that they all work together and that this isn't hard, because we shouldn't be spending a lot of time doing architectures. It's something that can be done quickly and easily and doesn't have to take years to do or cost a fortune. Then also work with your customer. Make sure that you're producing what they want, because if you're not doing that, you're not making your customer happy. Nobody's going to be happy when you finish that. Okay, so what's a good technique? Now, of course, number one in the group is view graph engineering. We know them. They're called PowerPoint Rangers, Visio architects, and there's a lot of that out there, and that's okay perhaps to an extent. But really what that is a very unstructured, it's a very ad hoc way of doing it. What people have realized is that you can apply model-based systems engineering techniques to do architecture. And in fact, if you look at the products that were originally designed in the architecture framework, they are all systems engineering products. So they're ones most of us were familiar with long before we called it model-based systems engineering, by the way, or architecture. I've been doing this for at least 25 years. It's probably closer to 35 now, doing this kind of work using a variety of different structured analysis techniques. I use Jordan DeMarco, Hatley Peerby. So a long time before many of these other things came out. IDEF came out in the 70s. That was one we used as well, and for many years. More recently, three new ones have come up in play, which is UML and SysML, and they've been around for a little while now, about a decade or so for SysML. And so some of these things are relatively new still. Those are object-oriented techniques and approaches, particularly driven by software needs. The business community created something called BPMN, the Business Process Model and Notation, and so that's a good way if you want to talk to business people. What we found is that both those all these have good features to them, but what we needed was something that would cross the whole life cycle, be simpler, cleaner, easier to understand, and so a group got together and created the lifecycle modeling language. And if you go to lifecyclemodeling.org, you'll see this specification. It's an open specification, which is meant so that anybody can actually implement it. So that's your techniques. Again, there's lots of details on every one of them, so I won't go into those today, but for more information, you can contact me. Also, the process. Now, that was the second item. We had to do a process. We want something simple, easy to understand, something that's complete, that does the whole job we need, and produces the DoDAF products as a byproduct of the process. So if you look at the diagram here on the right, this is one I've been using for years, since the mid-90s. In fact, I call it middle out. It's a process that flows very nicely. Notice time, I'm doing many things in parallel. And again, I can do this because it's enabled by the tool. I then also produce I'll show you the final versions are shown kind of points in time as where you'd show final DoDAF products as part of it. And but you have to have the ability to have the earlier versions of every one of these things beforehand. Notice also I've got a ConOps in the middle, which is a great way to communicate with the architects, between the architects and the operators, and so that's a great way to do that. And of course, last but definitely not least is the tool. You need something that has interactive models, not just drawings with a database. Visio has drawings with a database. It's actually a nice tool for that if that's what you're going to do. But it doesn't have the semantic meaning, which doesn't mean it can't be executed easily. And I can build in errors. And so to make sure I don't have errors in my logic, I want simulation techniques. I need discrete event, and I need Monte Carlo because there's heavy variability in many of the time dimensions and other dimensions of the problem. So I need to make sure I have that ability to run it many times through to see what would really be the impact of those distributions. You need an ontology and the way to visualize the ontology. In other words, the ontology is the bins of information and how they're related to one another. And so how do I visualize that? And of course, visualizations from the database. You need to have it made different ways to look at the same information. And of course, last but definitely not least for model-based system engineering, you have to create reports from it. The whole idea of you feed the database and then you get back out all the reports you need and all the products you need to make your customers happy. So let's go see a tool that does this, and that's Innoslate. And when you first get into Innoslate, you're often started. Let's show you how you start. It'll ask you what your primary area of interest is, and most of these other things will be blank, so ignore them for the moment. So what do? Select your area of interest. Well, we're going to talk about architecture, so let's pick architecture. And so here's some of the elements of architecture we can look at. And what I have is I can create a new ConOps document. I can create new DoDAF products. I can import a DoDAF sample. Again, this is a good thing if you want to try it for yourself and kind of see what it looks like. And I have a little bit broader version I'm going to show you here in a minute. And then, of course, view the DoDAF documentation and some other information about general starts. So this dashboard also shows you when you start using it, recent notifications, who changed what, when. You also have a model maturity checker, which shows you how good your modeling is, and the results for that in detail can be seen here. These axioms came to us from Stevens Institute of Technology, but you can see the detail as you go into it. Notice, by the way, this is a very modern tool. It has all the hyperlinking back and forth to see things. We also have statistics, so we can show you the different elements, and we also show labels on the elements as well, so you can see that with it. And always feedback, please. Anytime you can give us feedback, we really appreciate it. Well, so let's say I really do want to start with DoDAF, and I want to create new DoDAF products. This will automatically take me to the DoDAF dashboard, or I have another way to get to it. I have a DoDAF dashboard here, and I can even pin it to the top. So now, from the menu, and notice now I can go right to the DoDAF dashboard. The DoDAF dashboard has many neat features for you. Again, it notices starting with the architecture information that we saw before. It has the LML specification, so if you want to go to the LML specification, you can see that. The LML specification has been mapped, and I'm going to scroll down to the DM2 statistics, to the DoDAF MetaModel 2.0. The DoDAF MetaModel 2.0 was developed in parallel with the lifecycle modeling language. But again, it still is more complex than frankly, we thought it was necessary. So what we've done is map it, though, so you don't have to worry about that. So don't worry about the DM2. Once you learn how to use this, you can use the DM2 nomenclature or the LML nomenclature, and that works very well. But you can see how many of each one shows up here in this bubble diagram. Again, here's your feedback panel as well. Now let's then look at each of these. Each of the products, each of the viewpoints have their own set of products, and you just click on the tab. I'm doing this pretty fast, so I'm going to go back through, don't worry. So you can see the different ones. And all the DoDAF products are here in one form or another. Some are reports, some are actual diagrams, some are actual documents. So when we've actually created, you can create a new AV1 under the AV1, or if there's already one here, it'll show. And so, in fact, since I'd already started this, gosh, I better do my AV1. So let's go take a look at our AV1. And there it is as a template. This is our document view, and it's a template already set up with information about the document. We actually put in information about what should be in each of the paragraphs, or in this case, I've actually started filling them in. So this is actually the project that we're going to show you. It shows you the different things associated with it. So you can go down, and of course you can use the navigation panel here on the left to get to things. So you get down to the point. Now in the early phases of this, when you're delivering it at first, it's just a plan. You don't have findings. So this you don't deliver till later at the very end as well. So we recommend you deliver a draft of this document at the beginning. That's your basically your project plan, and then add the findings at the end and get your approvals for the AV1 as you get the final document. And so this will be a nice tool. Now notice when you're in this, let me go back up to one of these that were starting to be filled in. There we go. So we fill in. Notice you have the ability to add and change things. You can highlight and make it bold or italics, bold and italics. We can bulletize. We can order number list. Also, you can embed tables. So here now you can actually put a table in here, or you can create a hyperlink. And since this tool is heavily hyperlink oriented, it's very easy then to navigate between different things within it. So you can actually use this as a basis to navigate and show people. So if you have findings later on as part of your description, you can then navigate to the things that tie it together and show the findings. This is actually a very powerful way to communicate and capture the information. Also notice we have pictures available, and you notice pictures show up everywhere. We have the ability to upload a picture for any entity as you go through, or you can embed it in the actual description field as well. So let's go back to my dashboard. And so that's the AV1, and you can work with that. And the AV2 for us is a download of the entire database in what's called PES format. It's the Physical Exchange Specification for DM2. That's basically taking and converting all the LML nomenclature and relationships into the DM2 nomenclature and relationships. So now you have that ability to, and this is an XML formatted document, so it's easy to work with and develop. CV products, same kind of thing here. We go through and see different vision diagrams, capability taxonomy, the different things, capability phasing. This is kind of interesting. This is a timeline diagram. And one of the things you'll notice that I think we're one of the few tools that actually produces a timeline diagram. But you can, it's completely editable and work with as you want to do this. So you can add new ones. You can, that's the new time. You can use existing ones. Or if you're on one, you can adjust the metadata associated with it, which includes labels. We use labels a lot to help organize and communicate the data and filter data and find things. So again, I think you find that very interesting. Capability taxonomy. Let's go to taxonomy. That's the hierarchy. That's a hierarchy diagram showing the capabilities. And since we've already linked them to lower level things, you'll see actually more information than you would with your initial one. Your initial diagram would probably be just these three. Again, notice that the sidebar has all the information about it on the side, and you can edit it right there. Okay, so you don't have to go into the database view to do almost anything in this tool now. You can, if you don't want it, if you made changes, didn't want to keep them, you just discard changes. That brings you back into the entity view, and so every entity in the database has this view, and this is the relationship. So this is another way to look at the information. But again, you almost never have to get to that view if you don't want to. Let's see. Anyway, that's and different. Oh, I'm sorry. So we have all kinds of matrices. So the matrices here are all clickable. You can change and adjust them. Now, by the way, when you change things, you are making changes or relationships between these entities. So the capabilities are here are your operational activities, and I've said that this capability is related to that operational activity. Okay, so that's important to recognize. Again, I have complete access to each of those entities. If I need to change them here, I can. Let's go back to my dashboard. So that's your capabilities kind of overview in a nutshell. DIV products, we have different models associated with those. You can look at a data model, and this is actually the class diagram, an initial class diagram, and you can show you how you can work with that. I'm giving you a very quick tour here. Here's another more detailed class diagram. So this is the actual class diagram as part of the tool. Yes, we actually do have quite a number of the UML SysML models in this as well. The OV products, well, we have to look at the OV1. It's always a context diagram. Now, what's interesting with our OV1 is we have the ability to upload pictures associated with them. So here are your pictures associated with the different assets that are part of it. And those then also are connected together using connectors. And they're easy to work with, by the way. All you do is drag and drop. And that's true with all this tool. When you're doing anything, and it automatically gives you a name, and you can put the description of other information. Now, by the way, I don't want to save that. This is a live database, so let's not do that. And, of course, the variety of other products and stuff, as you want to see here. Probably one of the most interesting ones is the actual one of these scenarios. So let's go take a look at one of the models scenarios. So here's an IDEF0 version of the model. Now we have a very full-featured IDEF0 tool with tunneling and all the other factors of IDEF0. So if you're happy with that and want to use IDEF0, it's right here for you. That's one of the techniques that's used. Another is the sequence diagram. Oh, I'm sorry, I grabbed the wrong one again. Go back. one here. Ventrix, there we go. C. So there's a sequence diagram. So again, if that's something you want to use instead, and you're more comfortable using a sequence diagram, then those are available to you as well. But my favorite is our action diagram, which combines the two, so I get to see both of them together at once. Now this is actually a very powerful diagram because I have not only the timing and sequencing information captured here, I have data flow, and I can even do resource allocation. So I can do my resource flow with this as well, and I can assign assets to branches. So that actually does an allocation of these two different parts of the database. Okay. Let's see. I want to make sure I leave room time for questions here. DoDAF dashboard. Let's see if there's any other unique things. Project view. Various project view, timestone, matrix. Okay, there's matrices. Here's another timeline chart. Just see what that looks like. Again, most of these things you've seen before, because once you've seen one, you see we're using the same technique over and over to help us understand and work with it. Many of the things like the services, remember I mentioned the services view 6 was a resource flow matrix. That's a report. You can execute that and get the services flow matrix. By the way, you notice we've added each of these products. You can have many of each one of these. So you have a long list, and in fact, I think you saw that in the OVs. We had 3 different scenarios captured within each one of them, and so that's available. And standards view. So basically, that's the tool in a nutshell as far as the actual products go. There's so much more to explore in the tool, though, because it's designed to help you support the entire life cycle. So if you go back here, and we go ahead and select the full lifecycle management, we can do what we just did in architecture, we could do for all the different phases, including a requirements tool. We have a full functioning requirements capability and tool, including with quality checking of requirements. We have risk capability, risk matrices associated with it, create project plans, new SOPs, standard operating procedures, ISLPs, IB&D plans. So many of these plans are already available, already as templates you can start from, and of course you can tailor and add your own templates as you want to go through and use it. So I think that's the main part of what I wanted to talk about today. So let's go back to our slides. And I think, Elizabeth, it's time to talk about questions.
Thanks, Dr. Dam. We've already received several questions. If you haven't done so, please send your questions through the panel on the right. Dr. Dam will answer as many questions as he can before our time is up. Our first question here is, how does Innoslate use DM2?
Okay, so DM2 is the meta model that was developed by DoD to capture the information. What we did was we simply took the 500 lines of the DM2 model and mapped our LML model to it. And it turned out that the mapping was very easy. The only thing we had to add in a few places was some labels, and so some special labels, and so we were able to do that very easily. So now to output DM2 into that physical exchange specification format was very easy to do, and it's just a simple export. Any other questions?
We have another question. How do you develop specifications from the DoDAF models?
That's one of the things that's really interesting is that in general they don't have an easy way for doing that, no clear way, but what we've created in Innoslate is the ability to go ahead and create a specification from the information within the database. So it actually puts it out as a specification in a normal specification format. That allows you to basically create that within the document, and it actually puts it in our requirements view. So now our requirements viewpoint has that ability to then use that to make sure you have a really good requirements document, which a specification should be, and then you can pass that off to people. but it's still linked back to your original database. So if you make changes in your database, you can update that specification from there and have different versions of it as you go.
Our next question. We have another question here. Can you compare this software to Magic Draw?
Well, it's hard for me because I haven't really used Magic Draw a lot. I will say, though, we have, again, all the ability to do all the DoDAF. We have discrete event and Monte Carlo simulation. We have the ability to collaborate and share. I didn't even get into that part of things. We have the ability to share the project with other people in some powerful ways across the world. We have a group chat capability. We have the ability to, with that collaboration, if we have multiple users on the same database, there are indicators for that. So there's just a tremendous number of differences between the two tools. It's designed for that front-end part of the architecture lifecycle, software part of the lifecycle. We're really trying to be something much broader and working across the entire lifecycle. That's what I understand of it. Obviously, you need to do your own trades and look at your own, what are you looking for and how you want to do things.
Our next question is, what view would you use to answer the questions coming from our business development community? What deficiency existing in the customer's current capability? What are our possible solutions?
I'm not sure. You mean what DoDAF views in particular? Is that what the question is asking? What DoDAF views would support the customer in terms of the marketing, or I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you read it again?
He would like to know what view would you use to answer the questions coming from their business development community. What deficiency existing in the customer's current capability?
Okay, so you're looking you're really trying to show gap analysis, I think is what the question is really asking. And so what you're trying to show is why do you need the new architecture, why do you need the new things? And what you often want to do is compare the architecture you're proposing to the current architecture and the current problems. You really can't develop a gap analysis unless you do both endpoints of the architectures. And so sometimes people call that the as-is architecture and the to-be. And then once you identify what those are, then you can start looking at things like your transition plan, your capabilities views will show different capabilities. That's probably the highest place you can show, particularly for your business development folks. But all these different aspects would do it. But you want to summarize it and make it look in a very pretty package for business development. I've spent most of my career also working on proposals, and so I do understand how you're trying to use this information to communicate the why to buy, why to buy my system over some other system, and it can be used for that. But actually, any of the products can help you with that. I would also say the OV1 is another one that I would use extensively because that usually resonates to a broad audience. But between all those different things, you see it. We also have a three-dimensional matrix. I don't have all those view graphs in front of me, but we have a three-dimensional matrix that shows hierarchies, and it will show comparing two different hierarchies, like your functional hierarchy and your physical hierarchy, and you start seeing gaps in that. And so that's another way we can do that. That's not a regular DoDAF product, though, by the way.
Our next question is Innoslate your tool?
My tool. Yeah, so I'm the president of SPEC Innovations. SPEC Innovations is our company, and we funded the development of it. So yes, it's my tool.
Our next question is, there a template that helps create a MIL-STD 881C WBS?
Oh, MIL Standard 881 WBS. Actually, we have a report for that, if I remember correctly. One of our reports. is an 881 is a WBS, and so we have done that in the past. We're actually in the process of migrating those to new structures, but here's your WBS, your organizational interface, and the WBS dictionary. So we actually do create all those together as a report out of the tool. So the answer is yes.
Our next question is, does this software produce SML and or enterprise architecture?
Interesting. Okay, so enterprise architecture, let me answer that first. The enterprise architecture is architecture of the enterprise. So I've used this tool on very big architectures and looking at big problems across the Department of Defense. So yes, it certainly can support enterprise architecture. UML, SysML, we have a number of the different diagrams. We have the use case diagram, the class diagram, sequence diagram. Basically, the activity model and the action diagram are essentially the same fundamentally, and several others. I forget all the ones we have. So we have most of them already. We actually have development on the other visualizations that are give you the complete set, because it's actually relatively simple to do because we actually have all the information. It's just a matter then of showing it. So if that's a priority for somebody, we are very customer driven, and so we'd love to hear from you to say, hey, yes, I got to have that before I can buy it. And that helps us decide where to put our resources and what to move forward.
All right, we have time for one more question. What DoD agencies use this currently?
Actually, we've used it across many DoD agencies. The Navy, we've used it on Army projects. We're using it for the Marine Corps currently. I think we do a lot of work with the Office Secretary of Defense, Joint Staff. Haven't done a whole lot with the Air Force. We used to do a lot with the Army. Using this class of tools. So, yeah, we've actually worked across most of DoD. Agencies, various agencies have used it. We're currently, DITRA is asking for it. Just a variety of them. Also, intelligence community, we've worked heavily in the intelligence community and used it there as well.
That concludes the question and answer portion of the webinar. We would like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As a reminder, we will be following up with you very soon to send you a link to the recording and the presentation slide deck. We would also like to invite you to our next webinar in November, so be sure to check your email for the invitation. Dr. Dam has a new book entitled DoDAF 2.0, A Guide to Applying Integrated Executable Architectures. The book will be released in November on Amazon. A preview of the book will be available on the Innoslate and SPEC Innovations website. We also encourage you to visit our website and our blog, as well as connect with us on social media.